Hi, I'm Amanda Bilek. I'm the Senior Public Policy Director with the Minnesota Corn Growers Association.
And I'm Alex Trunnel, and I'm the Public Policy Manager with the Minnesota Corn Growers Association.
Nice. All right, Amanda. The Minnesota legislative session just wrapped up. What are some of the positives in the agriculture category?
Yeah, so I would say that actually the things that were positive were probably the things that didn't happen. A few specifics of some pieces that we had been working on this year that we did not see in a final budget bill. First and foremost was, as we went into session, there was a proposal to increase the user fee on nitrogen fertilizer. Essentially, this would have been a new tax or a new fee that farmers pay on the use of nitrogen fertilizer, commercial fertilizer. That fee would have been dedicated into a new revenue account, and that revenue would have been used to help remediate or mitigate concerns around nitrates in drinking water in southeast Minnesota. The legislature instead handled a different way that we had been advocating for how to address those concerns in southeast Minnesota by allocating and appropriating dollars, general fund dollars and clean water fund dollars for a variety of activities in southeast Minnesota that Alex will talk about in a little bit. The other piece that we did not see included in the final budget agreements was around drain tile. There had been a proposal to do a real estate disclosure for private drain tile. That specific provision still needed a lot of work before it was going to become law. The concerns raised by agriculture were also shared by some of the county associations that include the county recorders and the county assessors. That did not make it in a final bill as well. And then the third thing I would mention that did not end up getting passed, and it was sort of derailed earlier in session, but it was around a low carbon fuel standard or a clean fuel standard. This policy proposal has had significant problems with it in the past, and it did not end up making it into a budget bill and therefore into a final agreement. We consider that as a positive piece that did not see much more life this session.
Okay, one of the policy decisions was around the public waters inventory. Can you talk about how the inventory impacts corn growers and what the legislature passed?
Sure, yeah, the public waters inventory and the maps that come along with it are really important to corn farmers and other jurisdictions as they decide if they're working with public water or not, especially for farmers back when the buffers were being implemented, knowing if you need to do a 16.5-foot buffer or a 50-foot buffer. And one of the contentions this year was whether or not we needed to update the maps or whether or not the statutory definition is what determined if it was a public water or not. And we had been advocating for a long time that the maps should be updated and should reflect what is and what isn't a public water. And at the end of session, the Environment Committee allocated $1 million per year for the next 8 years to update those maps. They did also include the language that would make the statutory definition still fit if it's a public water or not, but that won't go into effect until 2027. The DNR expects to be able to do about 12 counties a year over the next 8 years to get those maps updated, and we'll be working with them closely and with other stakeholders as they go through that process.
All right. So Southeast Minnesota's Karst region has been a point of discussion among a lot of state agencies this year. Can you talk about what policy decisions were made this year that impact that area?
Yeah, absolutely. As a part of the response to the EPA petition, the legislature in both the Agriculture Committee as well as in the Clean Water Funds were able to give a lot of money toward the Karst region. In the agriculture bill, there was $2.8 million for water treatment for reverse osmosis systems for people in the area whose wells have tested high for nitrates. And there was also about $500,000 specifically allocated for the Soil Health Financial Assistance Program just for the Southeast, so that there's more help for them to implement those types of practices to help protect groundwater down there. Within the Clean Water Fund, there was about $7 million appropriated. About $3 million of that 7 is going to the Ag BMP loan program at the Department of Agriculture to help Southeast. There was also another $1 million to help implement the nitrogen fertilizer management plan and the research that goes along with that, as well as about $2.7 million to the Department of Health to provide free well testing and well inventory for the area so that we are able to know what we're dealing with in the long term as the state agencies address this issue.
Okay, let's turn our attention to energy. What policy decisions around energy should corn growers understand?
Yeah, so one of the most significant I had mentioned earlier, but it was around this proposal for a low carbon fuel standard or a clean fuel standard. This would have significant impacts for Minnesota's ethanol sector as well as for corn farmers who supply a source of feedstock to produce ethanol. A low carbon fuel standard would essentially look at setting a scheduled carbon intensity reduction over time, and then fuels would need to qualify and come in lower than that baseline that gets set in order to generate and receive these credits under a policy construct such as this. This proposal has probably been around in Minnesota for the last 4 of the last 5 legislative sessions, probably. All versions of the bill so far, there have been significant concerns that Minnesota Corn Growers Association, along with the Biofuels Association, has had concerns about. This year, a coalition of agriculture and biofuel groups did work together to sort of put forward what would be some changes that would need to be made in the bill in order to sort of move us to a position of neutral. And then we also had a set of positions that would have moved us towards potentially being in support of the bill. But early on in session, there was pretty vocal and loud opposition from the Sierra Club just around a low carbon fuel standard. They actually think that it benefits corn ethanol too much. We think that it probably doesn't benefit corn ethanol in the biofuel sector enough. So effectively, that proposal was sort of effectively dead early in session, given the significant opposition from the Sierra Club. It is something that we anticipate that we might see in future legislative years. One of the other pieces that was done that was a significant piece of work that the Senate and the House worked on was around a clean energy permitting and siting reform bill. This is in response to the 20 by 40, 100% standard for carbon-free energy that was passed last year. A group of clean energy advocates worked with the Public Utilities Commission to come up with a set of recommendations for how Minnesota's environmental permitting system could be actually sped up for clean energy projects. Permitting reform and energy or environmental permitting reform is something that we have long supported and trying to make some changes to. What we had concerns about was just doing this for a particular sector and not looking at some of the broader changes that need to be made in the environmental permitting sector. So we do think that there'll be an opportunity to provide, to work on this issue in the future. Hopefully this process that was done this year provides a little bit of a model to make some changes in future years. But because there has been increasing competition for productive farmland, especially in greater Minnesota with solar development, we do have some concerns that speeding up the process for approving some of these projects could increase that competition for productive farmland in greater Minnesota for new solar development. And so that is one area that we will also be watching as they work towards implementation of this new law in Minnesota.
Outstanding. Okay, are there additional legislative decisions that corn growers in particular should know about from this session?
Yeah, as Amanda mentioned at the beginning, the Agriculture, Fertilizer Research and Education Council was extended for an additional 5 years. This account and the council that distributes the money is meant for farmer-led research in the fertilizer space to help farmers more efficiently use those products. There was some changes to the council and the charge for the council in the coming years, specifically around the membership. There'll be 4 additional membership spots, including a person from the Soil Health Coalition, as well as someone who is in the health space and water quality space. There also will be prioritization and other sources of nitrogen, such as manure, and the Minnesota Corn Growers Association will continue to have a representative on that council for the next 5 years.
Okay, so Minnesota Corn Growers Association is focused on advocacy for corn farmers, but that happens throughout the year, not just during the session. What will you be working on as we move through the rest of 2024?
Yeah, so our immediate priority now that session is done is really making sure that we connect with our members. I'll be talking about some of these outcomes from the legislative session. What were some of the things that didn't get done? What are some of the things that did happen that are positive for agriculture and for corn growers? And then what are some things that we anticipate are going to be back in the future? As a part of this process, we also hope that we can start soliciting some ideas on policy priorities from our membership for 2025 on state policy. And then we'll also be kicking off and starting our grassroots policy development process, which is getting resolutions from our counties and from individual members that help to make up our policy positions for the association. And then separate from the work that we do with membership more directly over the next several months, there is always activity outside of legislative session with various boards, commissions, working groups that meet in the interim. Alex is an active member of the drainage work group as one example that meets monthly. So we'll be participating in those various efforts. There will also be efforts to implement some of the pieces that were passed this year, and so we will be involved in working with state agencies around some of the implementation of a few of these policy provisions. Alex had talked about the public waters inventory updates. That's something we anticipate we'll be spending a lot of time working with and even getting our members engaged in that process as well. And then this is an election year, so we will be doing some work, not only engaging with current elected officials, but then also looking at how we can build relationships with candidates for public office, be sharing information with them about corn growers and corn farming in Minnesota, as well as the corn sector. So there'll be a lot of efforts around candidate education and then deepening and strengthening some of our relationships with existing elected officials and getting ready for next legislative session, which begins in January of 2025.
Feels like it's going to be right around the corner. Just to wrap up, is there anything else that you wanted to cover that we didn't really talk about that people can, corn farmers in particular, should use as takeaways from this legislative session?
I think we covered a lot of the high points, the things that we have been spending probably the most amount of our time working on. There are lots of other little minor pieces that also did or were included in some of these final budget bills. And if you have questions on some of those minor pieces, feel free to reach out to us directly, or you can work through your district field manager on questions that you might have about the legislative session.
All right, thank you, Amanda and Alex.